Hello viewers and welcome to a new episode of Trashtalk on Flying Circus, Chariot of Steel Edition, a series that's all about discussing the good and very bad of the many tanks and tank-like vehicles you can find in the Chariot of Steel expansion for Flying Circus. In today's episode, VM96B Flakstampfer, and CV95B Uberbis. Let's start with the Flakstampfer first. Year introduced, 1596, served with, Macchi Republics, engine, Schreiber B9, strengths, versatile support, weaknesses, soft shell, no range. Macchi had been working on a variety of light walkers and had deployed several for trial runs. The original Model A was an infantry support vehicle carrying a 37mm cannon and an aircraft rotary engine on the underside. It performed well in direct support, anti-vehicle, and ambush capacities. As the Macchi Republics began to lose air superiority, the vehicle was redesigned into a mobile machine gun carrier which could ward off strafing aircraft, to be attached at the battalion level to infantry. Additional armor was added to the thin roof alongside a sophisticated gun sight, though other armor was removed to save weight. Production of these models soon outstripped the Model A and became by far the most common walker in service. The ability to rapidly deploy heavy machine guns to ward off attacking aircraft was a highly effective deterrent and handily covered Macchi's retreat to the northern shores. The VM96C served in the final months of the war in the Northern Islands, where it proved to be a lethal combatant in the jungle, though they were ironically doomed for lack of castor oil supplies. Examples of all VM96 models were captured by both sides of the Rona Pact, and armored up engined models continued production under Fokker occupation. Yes, I know, the Flakstampfer looks very familiar in a way. This is totally a coincidence. The Flakstampfer is fast, agile, good at crossing over rough terrain as long as it's not too soft, in which case it only becomes as bad at moving as a normal car. But with 2 armor in every direction and only 24 integrity, this thing could potentially get shredded by even a pub machine gun, while a shot from an infantry cannon will just go right through it. You do not want to take a huge hit in this thing. It's cheap as heck, the engine is okay, but it cannot stay off the supply line for long at all. This thing will need an additional fuel source or else it will run out in the middle of nowhere, usually in Fey territory. That's bad. That's really bad. Like the Eliminier, the Flakstampfer only requires 2 crew, a driver, and a gunner, which makes running this thing really cheap, and its weapon is consisted of 2 coaxial pub machine gun that can aim only forward and up, but that doesn't matter because its entire hull can be turned like a turret, add in lead gun sight, and the Flakstampfer is another tank good at dealing against aircrafts, light vehicles, and infantry. It's kinda in the name really. Unlike the Flakter however, this thing has the anti-air shell trait, which gives it +1 armor when being attacked from above, whether from airplane or other things at high ground, meaning the Flakstampfer is the opposite of the Panzerstampfer. You want to fight this thing on even ground or below it, and also it means that the Flakstampfer is way tougher against aircraft attack, compared to the Flakter that must burst its prey down before it shoots its armorless frame up. As it is a walker, the Flakstampfer also has turret hull, standing tall, and high ground pressure traits. Basically, as mentioned in the last episode, its entire hull can be turned in any direction. Infantry has problem hitting anything but legs in melee, and it has problem going over mud. If you want more details, you can check out what I have talked on the Panzerstampfer in the previous episode instead. There's also one more thing, the Flakstampfer has the gunner's periscope trait, which gives it disadvantage to fire its weapon when any of its hatches are open. Look closely, this is the driver hatch, and the gunner hatch is beneath the periscope. Opening either will render the periscope non-functional and you are basically shooting from your hip. This also means that the crew can't expect to get a good shot while they poke their head out to see the situation clearly, effectively forcing you to have tunnel vision in combat, literally. This is to balance out the fact that the basic Flakstampfer has 2 pub machine guns and they are really good. Everyone knows since World War II that you just could never have enough heavy machine guns. This also means that while you can totally still try to put on pintle-mounted guns on this thing, it might just end up making the Flakstampfer less effective. Combines its armor, speed, and mobility, and the Flakstampfer can really bully light tanks, vehicles, and infantry around, though against heavier tank with thicker armor, I suggest running, though flanking, and then shooting their rear with dual pub machine guns is always an option. Just remember that with 24 integrity, a single field cannon shot will set you on fire, if it hits. As for how to deal with this thing, remember, it's a soft shell crab. Low caliber firearms won't work against it, but just about anything that can be remotely considered as anti-tank in this era will. Just try not to shoot it from the rooftop, and if you are leading an infantry squad, better stay out of sight until you get an opportunity to shoot it at its flank or else you will get cut into pieces. I also want to mention that if I'm not using TDS, saying the word soft shell crab is gonna twist my tongue into a goddamn fiddle, another thing on the long list of reason why I use TDS for my videos. And thanks to the sacrifice of the Panzerstampfer, the Flakstampfer has plenty of space to write modifications and variants in. First is the original model, the Model A, or Infantry Stampfer. I'm clearly spelling that wrong. It's a variant with an infantry support cannon plus a coaxial water-cooled machine gun, a combination that can't really go wrong. It also loses anti-air shell and lead gun sight, but has 3 armor frontally instead, letting it actually takes hit. Next is the Model C, or Stahlophant, a variant armed with trench mortar, repeater cannon, and also a WMG for the driver. Trench mortar is a lightweight artillery that can be used to launch stuff with. In Chariot of Steel, it can be used to launch any one-handed grenade, which can include normal grenade, stun grenade, shaped charge, thermite, incendiary, the other incendiary, smoke, toxic smoke, gremlin, and immobilizing vine. And usually, these grenades are thrown by hand over a really short range. The trench mortar can launch these all the way to long range, making it not just tactically flexible in terms of option, but can also apply effect nothing else can at long range, more so when you have the money to burn. The trench mortar itself can also be used to launch parachute flare, so even nighttime operation is not a problem for the Stahlophant. It has a lot of firepower too, more if the driver also decided to sit still and fire the gun. It also has wire cutter, capable of cutting through barbed wire and allow infantry behind it to move in without issue. Lastly, there's a modification that can be taken by all models, the Fokker-Leichter Panzerstampfer, which gives 3 armor to front and sides, but make the Flakstampfer slower, less reliable, have more problem climbing, and also lose anti-air shell for all models, though now it can certainly take a beating. So, let's go back just a bit. Walker tanks are good at climbing over terrain, but one of their main problem is that they can't really aid non-walker vehicles when traveling due to the different movement system. It can't make the road easier to travel, but the different models of the Flakstampfers basically fill out the different roles a ground force want: anti-air, anti-tank, and infantry support. Add in the Panzerstampfer to carry the really big gun, and you could have an entire combat group consisted solely of walkers. That said, you really want something to carry fuel around. The Flakstampfer hungers for the blood of the earth. Now, let's continue onwards with the Überbiss. Year introduced, 1595, served with, Macchi Republics, engine, Sam Courier 12, strengths, discount bin heavy, weaknesses, sinks on land. It quickly became clear that the production rate for the VM94 was not going to meet demand, and the issue was the locomotive mechanism. While the Walker fit the requirements of Macchi's doctrine and allowed their army to carry armor support into any situation, the lead time on production made relying on them exclusively impossible. At the height of the issue, 3 sets of hulls were produced per Walker chassis. Rather than waste this excess industrial potential, it was ordered these excess hulls be converted into cheaper conventional Victory tanks, using power plants purchased from Macchi's new allies in Sopwith and a Caterpillar track system taken from agricultural tractors. The hope was that these vehicles could be sped into service to reinforce units in the lowlands, freeing the VM94 for elite Alpini and urban warfare divisions. Perhaps unsurprisingly, the Carro della Vittoria did not go as planned. Tracks even theoretically capable of crossing trenches required extending the hulls, which negated much of the built-up reserve chassis. The resulting tank was clumsy, sluggish, and had a tendency to flounder in most terrain. Still, it was all Macchi had, provided tank building experience, and as production issues were never sorted they were produced until the end. The Saint-Charmant is the second French tank to enter service during World War I, because the Schneider CA, French first tank, is a commercial rival developed almost at the same time. The Saint-Charmant obtained exactly 0 lesson in tank design from it. It has a real cannon, true, but its overhanging hull caused it to get stuck on even the slightest bump on a terrain, let alone the trenches World War I is plagued with. That said, when the war moved on to maneuver warfare in latter end of the war, the Saint-Charmant does work very well, as an assault gun, and also the fact that it can move at a blistering fast speed of 12 km per hour, a speed almost impossible to be reached by a lot of contemporary tanks, including the Schneider CA and even the Renault FT, it's just that it can only reach the speed on open terrain with no bump. All that is reflected in the stats of the Überbiss, being the only heavy tank with a speed 3, and also has -3 in torque. To put that into comparison, a car has torque of -1, a car could probably escape the Überbiss by just driving over a small dirt hill. It does have good handling due to how long its track is, Has an armor profile of 422, respectable, though with only 24 integrity, this thing might get set on fire faster than you think. Reliability is surprisingly good, fuel range is not a problem, and of course, you get what you pay for, at least it's cheap. Like the Panzerstampfer, the Überbiss has a frontal field cannon with binocular sight, good for sniping across the distance, and 3 light machine guns for infantry deterrent, but without turret hull trait from the Panzerstampfer, the Überbiss is vastly more vulnerable to getting flanked. The Überbiss also has 2 hatches for you to add pintle-mounted guns on, something that can aim backward might be a good idea, and also, one thing to remember here, unlike most heavy tank, the Überbiss does not have a dedicated mechanic, meaning if this thing suffers any problem, someone will have to get out and check it, a very dangerous task in the middle of a combat. The Überbiss also only has one trait, artillery tank, which lets you use the field cannon as a light howitzer. This still makes the Überbiss as good as Panzerstampfer in long-range attack, direct or indirect, but now it serves more as a clutch due to how vulnerable the tank is at moving and getting flanked. I mean, look at this thing, it's literally the size of a barn. The poor torque doesn't just give poor performance in combat either, moving this thing through long distance is going to be a pain in the ass, more so than even the Panzerstampfer, which is saying something. It's real funny and ironic of Erica to make an incredibly maneuverable tank from a tank with a negative off-road crossing capability, and lets you play both version at the same time. If you can, just stay at long range in combat, and buy something else once you can afford it, or just steal something else. When fighting against the Überbiss, it's a joke of a tank, but it's still a tank. Treat it like any other heavy tank that you need to flank against to defeat. Infantry will have a vastly easier time dealing with the Überbiss than the Panzerstampfer. A single light machine gun in a single direction is a laughable defense, and if you need to divert it, making a pile of rubble to block its path is probably enough to make one fear of getting stuck. As for its modifications, there's the original Model A, which has 3 frontal armor but slightly more torque. This will get cut down by field gun unless you go hull down, but it does have easier time crossing over obstacle. Then there's Model E, Urban Warfare model, which has more LMG and armor on either side, and also replace the field cannon with Landflammenwerfer, dangerous to infantry at close range, but easy to deal with by any other tank. Then there's Model F, which strips out the cannon and gun crew to transport 8 passenger, still has the 3 LMG left for the crew to shoot stuff with, probably the most useful variant of the Überbiss, but it still can't cross over terrain well. And then there's the Model H, which upgrade the gun to a heavy field cannon, but also further reducing the armor on its side and rear to just 1, very vulnerable to getting flank. Essentially, you now have 2 choice of heavy field cannon equipped assault platforms that aren't the stupidly big ones. You can go with the Rambach, which can sometimes spontaneously shut down or burst in flame, or you can go with the Überbiss that can't climb over small hill and will burst in flame when getting hit from any sides other than the front. Pick your poison. To basically sum up everything, the Überbiss is really Überpiss. And that's basically it on these 2 tanks, the killer can that is the Flakstampfer that can stomp its way into victory, and the boxy Überbiss that at the very least, let anyone be able to afford a heavy tank. Anyway, that's all for now, and I will see you all next time. Hello there, if you like this video, please subscribe and click that notification bell button. If you want to see the videos early as well as further support my channel, you can join in my Patreon page, or buy me some coffee, links in the description. Anyway, have a nice day.